panel. Okay, so good morning again from New York. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Despina Milaki. I'm the UN representative for the International Presentation Association, and I'll be moderating this discussion today. In this capacity and on behalf of this event's organizers, the International Presentation Association, the Permanent Mission of Ireland to the UN, and the NGO Working Group to End Homelessness, of course, along with our co-sponsors, I would like to welcome you all to this discussion. Just after the most recent closing of the 64th session of the UN Commission for Social Development, our distinguished speakers will focus on presenting aspects of the intertwined social protection and homelessness policies, on sharing best practices projects that uphold human dignity for homeless, as well as exploring possible innovative partnerships on action-oriented commitments. Homelessness is solvable, and by centering human dignity and expanding social protection, we and the global community, we can forge a pathway towards inclusive development and social justice. I hope you all enjoy this discussion. This is a unique opportunity for everyone to hear, to learn, to be inspired by experiences and knowledge shared by our prominent speakers. In the interest of time, as we move forward, I will not offer full introductions to each of our wonderful speakers, but their bios will be in the chat box for all of you who I'm sure you're interested in learning more about them. And before we begin, some housekeeping rules. I'm sure you already know by now. Please kindly keep your microphones muted so we can optimize our sound quality. We are recording this session, so if you don't wish to be shown or you don't feel comfortable, please feel free to turn your camera off. And I would like to also let everyone know that following our speakers' presentations, there will be a Q&A section. And with that being said, and without further ado, I would like to open this panel discussion. It is my privilege and honor to give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Dónal Cronin, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Ireland to the United Nations. Thank you again, Your Excellency, for accepting our invitation. It is a great pleasure to have you here with us today. All the UN member states, including Ireland, they had made a commitment to eliminate homelessness in their adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. SDG 11 states that by 2030, we must ensure access for all to adequate safe and affordable housing and basic services. So how is Ireland working at the UN to uphold human dignity and build a more peaceful, just and sustainable world? And how does this work relate to Ireland's efforts at the national level to invest in social protection and address homelessness? Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you, Despina, and good morning, everyone. I hope my voice holds up because I've been a bit croaky, but at any rate, I'll plow through. So apologies for that. And
Ambassador, I don't know what happened. You're muted.
oh, am I back now?
Yeah. Please
Oh,
go.
Sorry about that. To the NGO Working Group to End Homelessness, thank you and the great work that you do organising the event today. To also acknowledge ECPAT USA, the International Association of Charities, Sir Optimist International, and UPNE App, Women Worldwide, for your support for this event and also for the work that you do. I'm joined by Caoimhe Landy, who's our human rights advisor here at the mission, and we're delighted to take part and to support your great efforts, and great to see Jean online as well, and looking forward to hearing from you and from the others. Let me start with a simple but a powerful statement here, one that we need to, especially nowadays, keep reminding ourselves is at the heart of what we do and why we're here as a UN. And that statement is that human dignity forms the bedrock of all human rights. and social justice frameworks. And it is the foundation of freedom, of justice, and peace in the world. And that is laid out very clearly in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Um, and so upholding human dignity really serves as a basis for Ireland's work at the UN and our efforts to build a more peaceful, a just, and a sustainable world. So here we are approaching 2030 with only a few short years remaining for the SDG targets. And we know full well that the international community needs to do much, much more if we are to achieve the targets that we have set ourselves to do. Um, and we all know that with 700 million people around the world living on less than $2.15 a day, eradicating poverty, which is SDG number one, and reducing inequalities, which is SDG number five, probably remain two of our greatest global challenges. There are others, and many, and they're all interconnected. For example, with regards to climate change. Um, so we also know that those two SDGs I mentioned go hand in hand when we are addressing homelessness. Uh, these challenges, of course, we know will not be resolved overnight, and tackling them really requires a conscious decisions and policy making. And for us, and for a great deal of the membership of the UN, the North Star remains: how do we reach the furthest behind first? Leave no one behind, in other words. It's especially important, I would say, for policymakers to have an understanding, as I mentioned, of the intersectional issues that drive poverty, inequality, and homelessness. And that leads us to taking on a holistic, rights based approach to addressing these issues. For example, we know that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by homelessness, particularly what you might call hidden homelessness. And there we see that domestic, sexual, and gender based violence and traffic are two of the most hidden yet very pervasive human rights violations globally. And those impacted, usually women, are at a heightened risk of homelessness as a result. So the lack of safe and secure housing is also often noted as a primary reason why women feel that they have to stay in abusive situations, are compelled to remain in situations. Um, and for us, it's about tackling those at the multilateral level, the causes of that, trying to address that issue, and also at the grassroots level. In, for example, Kenya, where we partner with OHCHR and UN Women to support shelters for women who leave their homes due to the experience of physical or sexual violence. In my own time, when I was ambassador of Ireland to Uganda, we supported a whole network of shelters across eastern Uganda, and saw firsthand the lifeline that those shelters provided, the ability of women to come and find refuge and try to figure out what to do next. And so, really supportive of those efforts. At the national level, back home in Ireland, our Department of Housing does provide capital funding for the construction of domestic violence refuges. We have a capital assistance scheme for that. And also, our department issues policy and procedural guidance to local authorities on the role that they can play to assist victims of domestic violence. It's important here that you have a national and a local government approach and a community approach, all working hand in hand. Um, Last year, the Second World Social Summit for Social Development in Doha, we recommitted to placing the social dimension of sustainable development at the heart of the global agenda. That's an important commitment that we collectively as UN member states have signed up to. We've seen in Ireland how social protection really acts as a frontline tool for tackling poverty and inequality. Social protection acts not just as a safety net, but also a springboard for individuals to thrive, contribute meaningfully to their communities throughout their life cycle. Um, at the moment, Ireland spends around 20 million euros of our annual ODA budget on social protection directly through the many partnerships that we support in that area. I'm also proud to say that Ireland will invest for us a record level in ODA, in humanitarian and development support in the world in 2026, with our budget increasing by 30 million to 840 million. Now, I know in the greater scheme of things, that's a drop in the ocean. But it is important that we are still committing to the SDGs and that we are raising our ODA levels and trying to lean in further. And we're also not doing that out of the goodness of our hearts alone. We believe and we have a strong values approach and know that we have a moral and a responsibility to act to support the most vulnerable. Well, we're also doing it because it's in our self interest, because together we are safer, we are stronger. And we know that with the rest of the membership of the UN and with our partner countries around the world, that addressing issues together and learning from elsewhere for our own domestic policies and approaches is very important as well. So the programme for government in Ireland has a number of commitments to prevent, respond to, reduce homelessness. It is a big issue for our government and for our country, for our communities. And we're really trying to follow up on the commitment, for example, in the Lisbon Declaration on working towards ending homelessness by 2030. We have a National Homeless Action Committee, was established a few years back by our Minister for Housing, and that brings a cross-government and interagency approach. And that too is important, as well as the top-down interconnections across government to have different departments and agencies working together in coherence is critical as well. We know it's a complex issue. There is certainly no magic solution. And as many other Western countries at the moment, we are working to address the underlying causes that continue to bring people to enter into homeless situations. We know that real change will come if we work together at all levels, and ensuring also that those who are impacted are meaningfully involved in policy making, that we're not doing that absent those who are most affected. That those policy decisions should be made also with the perspective of civil society and community-led organizations in mind. And of course, the private sector, one of my final points is the private sector also have an important role to play. I myself worked many years ago with an organization called Business in the Community. And together with the shop, Marks and Spencer's in Dublin, we piloted a scheme for 12 homeless people to bring them back into the workplace. And out of those 12, 7 got full-time jobs. And that initiative evolved into what's called a Marks and Start program, which to date has supported 28,000 disadvantaged people in Ireland through training, mentoring, through a buddy scheme, employment opportunities, helping them to establish themselves, helping them to get into their own accommodation. And I just raised that as one example of how the private sector too has a responsibility in that regard. So, delighted to be here with you today. Very eager to hear from the other speakers. I'll give my own voice a rest now. You'll be glad to know, and pass back to you. And very much looking forward to hearing from the rest of you. So thank you very much, Despina.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Thank you for your remarks. Thank you for your time to be here with us today. And thank you for presenting Ireland's work at the UN to achieve the SDGs and build a more equal world where homelessness is addressed properly. Allow me to follow up on what you shared with us and reemphasize as you said, there is an urgency for a holistic rights-based approach, and we do have a responsibility to act. As you mentioned, it is a values approach to help those in need, and that signifies the importance of the effort that Ireland is putting to address this issue. Social protection is a springboard for individuals to thrive, and yes, you're right. Homelessness is a global problem affecting people of all ages at all stages of life. And it is essential to advocate for policies and strategies that are universal and rooted in human rights principles, as you pointed out. Ireland, and specifically the permanent mission of Ireland to the UN, have actively and continuously partnered with civil society and international organizations to elevate homelessness as a global rights-based issue. As you allow me to re-emphasize what you mentioned at the end of your speech, that real change will come if we all work together. And again, I'm beyond grateful for your presence here today. Thank you, Your Excellency. And now I would like to invite our next speaker, Ms. Maren Jimenez, Social Affairs Officer of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Thank you, Maren, for joining this panel discussion today. It is a great pleasure to have you here. As a social affairs officer, you are part of the writing team, right, of the World Social Report, previously the report on the world social situation, the UN flagship publication on social development. You work with data, you work on data, you work through data to know how healthy people are, how many people live in poverty worldwide, how many children are not able to go to school, and where we stand on gender equality and our efforts to combat climate change. So can you please describe briefly the role of data in addressing homelessness through inclusive social protection, and what are the key data challenges that the UN is called to resolve? Maren, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Despina. It's a real pleasure to be here. And thank you to His Excellency Ambassador Cronin and the co-organizers and sponsors for including me in today's conversation. I'm really grateful for the chance to talk together about what the research tells us and the data tells us about homelessness and what that means for policy and practice. And it's an especially interesting conversation to have in context of this year's Commission for Social Development, and it's focused on coordinated, equitable, and inclusive policies. As you mentioned, Despina, I sit in DESA at part of the writing team for the World Social Report. And, before getting to your questions about data, I think that it's important to just highlight like what our entry point is for when we think about questions around homelessness and data and social protection. And for us, we really consider it as sitting right at the intersection of poverty and inequality and insecurity. And these are the main forces that we highlighted in the 2025 edition of the World Social Report, in terms of rising inequality, growing economic insecurity, and how that's fracturing trust and reshaping people's lives. And we take great pains in the report to talk about how growing inequality and persistent insecurity are structural. They're not accidental, they're policy choices. And homelessness is one of the clearest ways in which these pressures become visible. It's not a marginal issue, obviously. As you mentioned, it affects many people, and it's a symptom of how the dynamics of poverty and inequality play out in daily life. And I think that word dynamic is key when we think about data around homelessness, only because we know that people rarely enter homelessness suddenly, and they rarely stay in exactly the same situation over time. We have longitudinal studies from Europe that show that many people cycle between different states in terms of lack of shelter, temporary accommodation, short stays with friends or family. And it's a dynamic experience, and these episodes are often repeated. So it's not just a single event, it's a dynamic state. And it sits at the extreme end of a much broader continuum of housing insecurity that many people face. But what little official statistics that we have focus on people without shelter and temporary accommodations, and those numbers are absolutely important, and we need a better understanding of how many people we're speaking about. they only tell part of the story. They're snapshots at one point in time and don't speak to the lived realities of people who experience homelessness. And so really what we're advocating is better documentation of how people move in and out of homelessness in response to things like job loss, illness, eviction, or climate shocks, conflict as well, as part of our understanding of the dynamics of poverty and inequality. And it may seem a bit of a technical issue to focus on improving measurement, and data, but it's not, because what we find is that narrow definitions in terms of data collection then lead to narrow responses, often focused on emergency services rather than prevention or long-term solutions. And while the experience of homelessness may be hard to count, the impacts are very visible. Another thing that the research that does exist makes clear is that not only is adequate housing a human right, but it's really essential for people to reach their full productivity and potential. And so providing affordable housing is not a cost, it's part of the investment that we make in our societies. It reduces the financial burden on low-income families, allowing them to allocate more of their income towards other essential needs. It enables people to better participate in education and work. And on the contrary, when people are facing housing insecurity, including homelessness and poor quality housing, this leads to health issues, which could increase healthcare costs and reduce student and worker productivity. And as we've unfortunately seen in the past couple of weeks in New York City, in extreme cases lead to death. There's also some interesting research that points that housing insecurity often leads to employment insecurity. Sometimes we think about it in the other direction, but that the causality can lead in the opposite direction in terms of the research around forced evictions and how that can significantly increase the likelihood of subsequent job layoffs. So suggesting that investing in affordable housing could have positive knock-on effects on employment security. And I think there's a significant research out there about how preventative housing policies also cost far less over time than repeated emergency responses to homelessness. So one way to think about it then is that investing in adequate, safe and affordable housing as part of our social protection systems ensures that other investments that we make in terms of education, health, and jobs are not lost. And again, that's one of the main arguments we try to make in the 2025 edition of the World Social Report. I don't want to take up too much time, only to say that really, housing, like many issues that we face, really need coordinated, people-centered systems that connect housing with social protection, healthcare, education, and decent work, because we see that when these systems operate in silos, people fall through the cracks. And it's about a bigger point that we argue for, in that making sure economies serve people and not the other way around. It's about recognizing housing as a foundation for dignity, security, and opportunity, and it's about acting earlier upstream before housing insecurity turns into crisis. At this point, I'll just end, as Ambassador Cronin mentioned, the Doha Political Declaration. The Doha Political Declaration, it was very difficult to improve on the 1995 Copenhagen Declaration for Social Development. It was fairly comprehensive and included a lot of things, but one of the great improvements in terms of the recommitment to Copenhagen and the acknowledgement of new issues in the Doha Political Declaration that was adopted last November was its recognition of addressing homelessness as an obstacle to the enjoyment of human rights and the attainment of social development. So it's keeping the issue on the agenda, and it's echoing the other commitments that have recently been reaffirmed in the General Assembly as well, and in the Commission for Social Development. And all of these commitments keep the issue of homelessness on the agenda, and they are moving us towards an integrated, people-centered framework for advancing social justice. And it's one that demands implementation, coherence, and accountability. So I guess my final point here then is just that if we take seriously the dynamic nature of homelessness, if we measure it better, if we can intervene sooner and design policies that protect both housing as well as our broader social protection and social inclusion, we can move away from managing homelessness to preventing it. And it's a challenge, and it's a big one. But it's one that really is worth it from a rights perspective, from an investing in our society perspective, and strengthening the social contract and moving forward towards social progress. So thank you very much, and I look forward to listening to the other interventions.
Thank you so much, Maren. Thank you so much for bringing this perspective to our discussion. We thank you also for your work at the UN in publishing such useful materials for all of us. You very well emphasize the intersection of poverty, inequality, economic insecurity, and homelessness, and the dynamics around these issues. As you said, one of the challenges is that they don't speak to the live reality of homelessness. But I really appreciate that you also emphasized that investing in housing policies can have a positive result on employment security. This is an aspect that many don't focus on. Data is critical in developing actionable solutions to address homelessness, and specifically accurate data is fundamental and essential for measuring, understanding, and solving homelessness, influencing policies, and ensuring no one is left behind. I remember the UN Secretary General stressed once, and I really love that. So I quote, accurate data is the lifeblood of good policy and decision making. So homelessness is a complex issue, but it can be solved using a people-centered, integrated, preventive, as you said, and evidence-based approach. Only with high quality data we can formulate the policies to bring the necessary change. And if we want to improve people's lives, if we want to leave no homeless behind, then we have to count all homelessness, because all of them count. So thank you again, Maren, for your insightful remarks. And I would like now to move on to our next speaker. It is a great pleasure that I introduce to you Sister Quinn, the Executive Director of UNANIMA International and the former chair of the Working Group to End Homelessness, a good colleague and friend of mine. Jean, from your experience, can you please describe how can we address homelessness through inclusive social protection? In other words, how inclusive social protection can transform homelessness from a growing crisis into a solvable challenge. Can you also provide a few examples of good practices projects that uphold human dignity for homeless and vulnerable people in similar situations? Jean, please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Despina, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Delighted to see some friends and colleagues, especially Quiva and the ambassador. 3 Irish people, I think, at the moment. Maybe there's 4 or 5, which will be most interesting. Just realizing as we were speaking that I'm 40 years this year working in this sector in terms of both being a practitioner and the founding of an organization. And just to add to Ambassador Cronin's, what he talked about development in Ireland, next week, Sophia Housing that I founded in 1997, with Presentation Sisters and the Irish government are opening a 23 million project this next week for supportive people who are experience homelessness. So that's really important. We're coming, as others have said, from the World Social Summit in Doha, the longed-for summit, since the previous one in Copenhagen in 1995. And we warmly welcomed the political declaration, which recognises adequate, safe and affordable housing as essential to adequate standard of living, which commits to housing policies that respond to the needs of low-income households, women, youth, older persons, people with disabilities, and those experiencing homelessness. Next slide. I just want to say also that housing is considered the top priority for ending homelessness and a foundational element of universal social protection. Next slide. I think when we talk about homelessness, because it's a word we can use a lot, we need to put a figure on it because the figures are really about people. And as you can see, there are 318 million people are homeless worldwide, 2.8 million people lack adequate housing, and 1.1 million live in informal settlements. 90% of that are in Africa and Asia. 880 million live in extreme poverty, and 3.8 billion lack social protection coverage. So as you can see, the world is facing an unprecedented crisis, including a housing crisis, when we look at these figures. And behind the figures lie deep inequalities, gender inequalities, which undermine social progress and human dignity. Next slide. For me, homelessness is not a natural phenomenon. It's a policy outcome. It's rarely about a single cause because it's a web of economic, social, and personal vulnerabilities. Inclusive social protection recognizes this complexity and builds systems that catch people before they fall and help them climb back up when they do. And that's really about how we're going to break the cycle of homelessness. Next slide, please. Why it matters to us really about homelessness is because across regions, homelessness is rising, not because people have failed, but because systems have failed them. Every person sleeping rough, every family in temporary accommodation, every child without a stable home is a reminder that our social protection systems are not yet inclusive enough, not yet strong enough, not yet universal enough. And this is not just a housing issue, it's a human rights issue. And human dignity is the cornerstone of all human rights and social justice frameworks, enshrined in documents such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Inclusive social protection means building systems that leave no one behind, literally. The next slide, please. Which includes income support that prevents poverty from becoming homelessness, services that reach people before crisis hits, treating housing as a right and not a reward. Inclusive social protection is not a charity. It is a state capacity, social justice, and makes economic sense to all of us. Next slide. People become homeless. Why people become homelessness? Well, no one becomes homeless because of a single decision. It's really because wages don't match rents, because mental health services are underfunded, because young people age out of care systems with no safety net, and I've worked in this system, because eviction protections are weak, and because social protection is too narrow, too conditional, and too slow. Homelessness for me is the visible tip of a much deeper structural iceberg. Next slide, please. This for me is the best the best metaphor to begin to look at homelessness. Oftentimes in working in this sector, we see what's on top. We see the top of the iceberg, but we don't see what's underneath. And that for me is one of the key ways of trying to break the cycle of homelessness. Next slide, please. We need an inclusive social protection strategy that recognizes what was under that iceberg. To end homelessness, we need a strategy that is comprehensive, coordinated, and courageous. It needs universal income floors that prevent financial shocks from becoming disasters. It's a safety net and a financial floor covering essential living costs such as food, rent, and childcare. Housing First programs provide stability immediately. Housing must be considered as the top priority for ending homelessness and a foundational element of universal social protection. We need an integrated health and mental health services that meet people where they are at. employment pathways that build autonomy and dignity, eviction prevention systems that stop homelessness before it begins, support for families, youth, older persons, people with disabilities, and Indigenous people, because that's where we break the cycle of homelessness. And most importantly of all, monitoring mechanisms to track progress and ensure accountability. And finally, empowering local communities to co-create solutions tailored to their own needs. Why do we have inclusive social protection strategy that will work for people experiencing homelessness? Because it prevents homelessness rather than reacts to it. Because it shifts us from a crisis response to prevention. It reduces enormous costs of emergency accommodation and healthcare. It strengthens communities and reduces inequalities. And it enables people to participate fully in society and in the economy. And most importantly, it affirms the truth: every person deserves a place to call home, not a house, a home. Next slide, please. Across the world, there are various innovative approaches to social protection and homelessness, which demonstrate the transformative potential of right-based policies. And one of the proven models is housing first. And it's recognised as the most common denominator required to end homelessness, providing the stability necessary for people to address other challenges like health issues, employment, and addiction issues. It says you do not have to, you do not earn your right to have a home. It says stability is the starting point, not the finish line. Countries that have embraced housing first have seen reductions in chronic homelessness, health outcomes, and lower public spending, and has good wraparound support, if you're passionate about that, as if you didn't know. This works because it restores what homelessness takes away: security, dignity, and hope. Next slide. Finland has led the way in this housing with wraparound support, and it was one of the leading countries in the world at the time, after I think the USA, in terms of housing first. Cities like Vienna offer coordinated services through centralized access points, reducing fragmentation and barriers. And I've been saying this myself for years. Portugal started in Lisbon with this housing first, adopting the model as a key evidence-based strategy to combat chronic homelessness. In Canada, Homeless Partnering Strategy, which uses community-driven planning and data. So for driven, it has driven interventions. South Africa, their constitution recognises the right to housing, and courts ruling have compelled governments to expand shelter and services, but yet it's very slow, but it is happening in some places. Sophia Housing in Ireland that I talked about has long-term housing with wraparound support and has a particular emphasis on trauma-informed care. And that goes from the top down or the bottom up, that everybody is trauma-informed. The next slide, please. The working group to end homelessness, really we've advocated on homelessness since 2017, and with success, but of course it's still ongoing. 2017, we started. In 2020, with our partners and support from the African Group of Nations, we succeeded in our proposal to have homelessness as the priority theme at CSOC-D, after which the Council issued its first resolution on homelessness as a mainstream UN policy issue. In 2021, the UN General Assembly adopted a second resolution on homelessness, inclusive policies and programmes to address homelessness, including in the aftermath of the coronavirus. In 2023, the the UN Secretary General's report on homelessness specifically addressed inclusive policies and programs to address homelessness. He also talked about the need for a global definition, data collection to address the issue. In 2025, the Secretary General's report on homelessness highlighted that while 78 countries now collect official data, which is up from, I think it was 44 in 23, over 300 million still experience some form of homelessness. So homelessness is not a reflection of an individual failure. It reflects collective choices. And that means we can choose differently. We can choose policies that prevent rather than react. We can choose to build societies where no one is left without a home. The question is not whether we can end homelessness. The question really is whether we will. And as I always say at the end of anything I'm talking at, please don't talk about us without us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jean, for your remarks, for sharing your points. Allow me to comment on what you shared first, this important project of 22, 23 million from the Presentation Sisters and the Sophia Housing Presentation Sisters. It is a community that I represent here at the UN, and together with Sophia Housing in Ireland, they have long been allies in addressing homelessness and provide housing with support across Ireland for people who experience homelessness. You have covered so many aspects on this topic, but I would like to emphasize the one you stressed, which reaffirmed that if we want to end homelessness, the only way to do so it is to follow an inclusive strategy that is comprehensive, coordinated, and courageous. This strategy speaks about an approach which involves everybody aligning all together toward a shared vision, which involves fostering bold leadership and prioritizing, as you said, preventive and not reacting, or inclusive policies that focus on systemic change. As you pointed out, homelessness is not a reflection of individual failure. It is a reflection of collective choices. And we all need at some point, each one of us from our own position, we all need to make the necessary, often tough decisions if we want to achieve a long-term success. Thank you, Jean, again for your inspiring remarks. And now allow me to move on to our next speaker, Ms. Sylvia Bills-Gelber, representing the Global Coalition for Social Protection Floors. Sylvia, it is a pleasure to have you here with us today and hear your perspective based on your experience. The Global Coalition for Social Protection Floors promotes the right of all people to social security. It promotes social protection floors as key instruments to achieve inclusive, equitable, and sustainable development. From your perspective, having a social protection floor in place, how can this support the homeless to escape their reality, and what might be its significance on averting situations that make people homeless, as well as its contribution on building human dignity and tackling inequalities? Sylvia, you have the floor. Can you please unmute yourself, Sylvia? You're still muted.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
yes, I'm now muted. I just wanted to say how grateful I am to be part of the panel, and the Global Coalition for Social Protection Floors, which I was a founder member of way back in 2012, is very happy indeed to be invited to be part of it. Thank you so much. And also to follow Jean and the His Excellency of Ireland and Maren, who have done so much to highlight the issue. In fact, 6 years ago, in 2020, we held a meeting at the Commission then We called it the right of all to roofs and floors, affordable housing and social protection. And Maren, you were on our panel, and it's great to be back again, because our overall conclusion then was that lack of social protection is a significant cause of homelessness. And we say it again, and we'll have to say it loud and until we get a shift in the political will and willingness of government to deliver on the human rights obligations of all of their citizens. So both things, social protection and adequate housing, are human rights, as we have heard. And the achievement of the SDGs will be dependent on those rights being delivered. We work on, in particular, the SDG 1 target, the social protection floor, which is mentioned as key for the reduction of poverty. We're 4 years away from 2030. How are we doing? And 5 years before the Doha commitments are reviewed. How are we doing? Well, let's just talk about social protection a little bit. The Doha political declaration expresses a very strong consensus on social protection. It has 26 mentions, and it has adopted an ILO target of increasing social protection by 2 percentage points in all countries. That's a recognition and a consensus that social protection is a right for all and foundational for equitable and sustainable social development. But the reality is, as I think we all know, we're way off target. A mere 50% of the world has access to just one social protection benefit. The social protection floor, which is a target in SDG 1, comprises 6 specifics of benefit. Minimum income in old age, times of disability, of unemployment for pregnant mothers and for children, along with access to affordable healthcare. It was unanimously adopted in 2012 as Recommendation 202 by the International Labour Council. It's a foundation on which the rest of social protection can be built. It's the floor. It's governed by ILO standards enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and its covenants. Implementation of the specifics of the floor really matter, because it engages the responsibility of governments to include and take appropriate access for these measures for universal access in old age, disability, unemployment, women and children, to its provisions for income and health. But it's not happening. Legislation matters and financing matters. And along with the commitment to the universality, to avoid replicating and exacerbating exclusions, discrimination, and stigma. So we in the coalition ask ourselves, as many do, how can the narrative and practice be shifted so it's no longer necessary to endlessly argue that social protection is not a cost, but an investment, a hand up, not a hand out? How can we ensure governments implement their obligations and promises, including by addressing and dismantling the intersectional barriers that have been mentioned, linked to gender, disability, age, migration, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, and indeed having a roof over one's head? Secondly, let's look at homelessness a minute. It features in the Doha Declaration. The Doha Declaration says that tackling homelessness is fundamental to the enjoyment of human rights and the attainment of social development. There are very important mentions of homelessness in the Declaration. underscoring the right to an adequate standard of living, including adequate, safe, accessible, and affordable housing. And I quote in 31N, it says, "We must take urgent and international action to address homelessness as an obstacle for the enjoyment of human rights and the attainment of social development." And there are other mentions too, which talk about rural, urban, and so on. And we know that in 2026, governments reporting on SDG progress will have to say what they're doing on SDG 11, the first target of which reads, by 2030, ensure access for all to adequate, safe, and affordable housing and basic services, and to upgrade slums. So how are we doing? Well, we've heard, not well. Habitat globally said in 2020, Habitat said now 3 billion live without adequate housing. Jean showed these very important figures. In 2020, these figures were less, so we have increased homelessness massively. In a time when austerity affects 24% of countries, where inequality is increasing, with the richest 1% of the world owning more wealth than 95% of the world's population, where 65% of the world lives in precisely those countries where income inequality is on the rise and homelessness is rising, along with conflict and exposure to climate change shocks. We know that inequality undermines social cohesion and threatens democratic governance, and is antithetical to peace and sustainable development. So we must ask why this is going on, and we must bring the homelessness issue really into the picture. And we must bring the homeless people themselves into the picture. Why are they so discriminated against? Who are they? Why do they lack IDs? Why are they put into the worst jobs? Why can they not get a job? Because they don't have a home. So what's the way forward? We know that homelessness is solvable. This has been stated. We know that political will is needed. We know that there are really important pilots and examples across the world. So, and we know that we are working on data, and we know we need a sound knowledge base for the data. So we also know that a joined up approach across government and stakeholders is critical, and we know that we can learn from good practice. In the UK, where I'm from, the Everyone In initiative, which was undertaken underneath a Conservative government, shows the difference it makes when central government takes on the leadership role and provides clear direction. So with government shouldering responsibility and working partnerships being established with homelessness organisations, housing providers and health services, it ought to be possible to make things move. But you see, it seems to us you have to be committed to inclusion. You have to be committed to rolling back stigma and discrimination. You have to face the task of hearing the homeless, of seeing them and listening to the solutions that they want. We recommend a few things. One is that in order for this to happen, along with social protection flaws to happen, we have to commit to universality, and we have to have clear time-bound plans, which can be reviewed nationally and globally and regionally. We have the timeline for this. We must have accessible, adequate, adaptive, and responsive social protection systems which are built on the floor, which is not yet there. 50% of the world does not have the floor. Secondly, we have to join up intentionally for a clear focus on accountability. Maren mentioned accountability. What does this mean? We have to know what the data is telling us, and we have to speak to our governments and our providers about what they are not doing as well as what they are doing. And we have to have the full inclusion, in this case, of the homelessness. This is vital. And thirdly, most importantly too, we have to call into question what we believe is an excuse of governments that domestic resources are insufficient to deal with these issues. Political choices matter, taxation matters, as does ODA matter, and global rules matter. Ending illicit tax flows is a very important question, as is climate reparations and payment of taxes by corporations. But governments must honour their promises, and states' obligations under international law matters. So if I can say I'm going to finish now with a key message we have, which I hope resonates, that what we would like to see...
if I may, if you can keep the key message at the end.
Oh, do you want me to leave it to the end? Okay,
yes, please, because all the other speakers will share that.
Okay, well then I've finished. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't take too long. Okay.
No, not at all. Thank you so much, Sylvia. Thank you for your valuable contribution and the perspective you brought in this discussion. You covered an array of issues, and I appreciate that you also shared what the Doha Declaration states about social protection. The Doha Commitments is a timely and relevant matter, as we all saw it was indicated during the 64th session of the UN Commission for Social Development, which just ended 2 days ago, and throughout which all participants there and speakers, they stressed the need for greater policy coherence. As you said, the specifics of the social protection floor matter for homeless people, as it requires government to include and take appropriate measures for universal access in old age, in disability, unemployment situations, pregnant women and children, to its provisions for income and health. Also, you stressed very clearly that legislation matters and financing matters. And as you said, the achievement of the SDGs will depend on whether we deliver on the human rights obligations when it comes to homelessness. Allow me to reemphasize your point on the urgency of moving from rhetoric to action, but also on the need of shifting the narrative that sees social protection as a cost rather than an investment. Maren already pointed that out before. So now it is time to introduce our next panelist, Ms. Marianne Broxton, who is the main representative to the UN for the ATD Fourth World, a human voice from a woman who has experienced homelessness and trauma in her life. Yet she managed to survive, and she didn't just survive, she has thrived ever since, with her most updated endeavor to be her transitioning into the role of Director of U.S. Policy and Advocacy for the ATD Fourth World USA in the coming months, I think in April. Thank you, Marianne, for being here and for raising your voice. I don't have a specific question for you, but I'll give you the floor to share with us any aspect of your lived experience you wish to share, and how you feel when you see all that is happening or not happening to address the huge, complex issue of homelessness at the country or international level, or both. Please, Marianne, you have the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Despina, for that lovely introduction and for the opportunity to speak here today on a subject that is dear to my heart, not just because I experienced homelessness as a child and then again as a teen, but because housing is a basic necessity and a human right. We're all here, so it's safe to say that we all believe everyone deserves a home. And everywhere in the world there are people, housing and homelessness is an issue. And you just heard Sylvia mention that homelessness has increased worldwide. And as Despina mentioned, although I represent an international NGO at the UN, today I really specifically want to focus on homelessness in the United States. Not just because this is where I live, so it's familiar to me, but because the United States has been labeled one of the richest countries in the history of the world. And yet, last year, more people in the United States were experiencing homelessness since 2027, the year that they first actually started collecting data. Last year, an estimated 771,480 people experienced homelessness, which is an increase of 18% over the previous year. Huge number. This count is done one night a year, usually in January, around the coldest night of the year. But that number is an estimate because we actually don't know for sure the actual number of people experiencing homelessness in the United States. I can tell you that my mother and I would never have been included in that count because we were doing what was called couch surfing, meaning with friends, staying with friends and families until we were at our welcome and then moved on to the next place. Of that number, as author Brian Goldstone has stated, recent research reveals that the actual number of those experiencing homelessness in the United States, factoring those living in cars or hotel rooms or doubled up with other people, is 6 times larger than the official figure. One of the reasons that this happens is because in this country, there is no county, city, or town where a person working a minimum wage job can afford a market rent 2-bedroom apartment. In New York City alone, in order to rent a room in an apartment, so not the full apartment, just a room, you need to earn 40 times the cost of that room. Or if you do not working a minimum wage job, you need to secure a guarantor who earns 80 times the cost of that room and is willing to vouch for you. As U.S. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley has stated, just because you can't afford more doesn't mean that you don't deserve better. And that's why I greatly appreciate that His Excellency said safe and secure housing in his statement, not just adequate housing. We know that there are several people around the country, around the world, that are just taking any place at all to say that they have a roof over their head. We hopefully we agree on this. Poverty is a policy choice. Homelessness is a policy choice. Lack of affordable housing is a policy choice. And all of these choices are based in the perceived worth of people enduring it. Several states in this country and cities and towns have adopted laws intended to protect the residences and the businesses from what officials have termed health and public safety nuances. To combat people, meaning our friends and neighbors that are experiencing homelessness, they are considered the nuisance, they're struggling. To protect people who are deemed undesirable in public spaces. So remember that, people deemed undesirable in public spaces because they can't afford a market rate home. Several years ago, former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg's answer to solving homelessness was to give people experiencing it a one-way bus ticket someplace else. So opposed to solving the issue and trying to find a home for his constituents, giving them a bus ticket someplace else. Recently, California Governor Gavin Newsom went so far as to show that he was tough on homelessness by clearing an encampment and throwing away people's only possessions. We can't arrest our way out of homelessness. Every dollar we spend criminalizing it is a dollar that we could have better spent preventing it and solving it and alleviating it for people. Encampment evictions are violent and make homelessness worse. It's reprehensible for our elected officials to try to deflect their failures to address their citizens' basic housing needs by blaming people experiencing homelessness. The lack of political accountability is shameful, inadequate, and it is re-traumatizing for the people experiencing homelessness. And I want to highlight Jean's point here, and I'm paraphrasing when she said, it's the system that is the problem, not the people. So what do we do? The answer is always housing first, always, without stipulations, without strings attached, without a mountain of bureaucratic paperwork, deciding who qualifies and who doesn't qualify, always housing first. Because as you heard Maren say in her statement, housing, nutrition, and healthcare are all intertwined. Poverty and healthcare are directly linked because it's hard to cope with chronic illness when you can't afford to have your basic needs met. It's not a personal failing. It's the result of hyper-capitalistic and ableist societies. We must stop blaming the individuals for their circumstances and demand social reform. We must stop viewing housing as a commodity and see it as a basic necessity and a human right. And most important, we always must put people first. It's not the homeless, it's people experiencing homelessness. It's people experiencing being unhoused because systems have failed them, not that they are failures. So I want to say thank you so much for your time and turn it back over to you, Despina.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Thank you for this inspiring presentation of yours, sharing of your thoughts. I would only reiterate what you said. We have to put people first. Always housing first, and everyone deserves a home. Let's keep that. I don't want to stay on the negatives that you mentioned, which is really disheartening to hear that if someone here in New York wants to rent a room in an apartment, they need to earn 40 times more of the cost for that room, which is crazy, right? If you think about that. And also this huge increase in homelessness the last year. That's very, very disheartening to hear. All I have to say is that we must allow ourselves to learn more about homelessness from homeless people. Those who have experienced homelessness do not want people discussing the topic without their participation. As Jean put it earlier, we must not talk about the homeless without the homeless. We must stop looking at people who have experienced homelessness as victims. We must look at them as survivors who have or will overcome a traumatic experience that does not define them. So thank you again, Marianne. I really appreciate your honesty and your openness in sharing your experience. Before we hear our last speaker, I would like to remind everyone that after that, we will open the floor for the Q&A section. So please have your questions ready to share them either in the chat box, or I can give you the floor to speak if time allows it. Please keep your questions short. That's a kind request. And if possible, indicate the speaker that your question is being addressed to. Of course, if it is a general question, then the whole panel will respond to that. So now I'll give the floor to Ms. Jackie Shapiro, the co-chair of the Working Group to End Homelessness, to wrap up this discussion and deliver her closing remarks. Jackie, you have the floor.
Thank you, but I'm speechless. This has been an amazing panel, and I'm glad there's a recording of it, because I think it's so dense that there's a lot to chew on, and I'm going to keep my remarks really short. So we have, and I have sort of edited them as we've gone along because we have covered a lot of this. But I just want to emphasize a couple of things that at the core, dignity, which is what we're talking about, encapsulates the inherent value and worth of every human being. It is the recognition and the acknowledgement of an individual's human rights, their autonomy, and their uniqueness. Dignity is, as we've talked about, not contingent upon external factors such as social status or wealth or achievements, but it is rather inherent attribute of all human beings possess. The Doha Political Declaration, as we know, centers on placing human dignity, social justice, and people at the core of sustainable development, aiming at a world free of poverty and inequality. It emphasizes upholding dignity of all, fostering inclusive growth, and ensuring that development policies prioritize human beings and rights. Upholding dignity for people experiencing homelessness requires transitioning from a charity-based model to solidarity, ensuring respect, agency, and access to basic human rights, basic human needs, which are everyone's human right. Upholding dignity for people experiencing homelessness involves shifting from punitive measures to people-centered, empathetic approaches, such as the Housing First model, which treats safe, stable housing as a human right. The emphasis must be on creating pathways for permanent supportive housing and ensuring those with lived experience are involved in policy creation. Inclusive social protection is essential. I wanted to give a couple examples of things I read in the newspaper recently that I thought were fabulous and all about dignity. The Prime Minister of Spain wrote in the New York Times last week that he was writing about migration. And he said that migration is, you have to make a choice, and it's a difficult one, but that nations must choose between closed and impoverished societies or open and prosperous ones. And he said, for the sake of prosperity and dignity, you must choose an open society. Another one I read just yesterday, which I loved, was an individual who at 12 years old was taken from a abusive foster home and put in a foster home. And he had to put all his belongings in a plastic bag, a trash bag. And when he was 18 years old, he took another trash bag and as he aged out of foster care and took all his belongings and left. Since then, he has created an organization that gives duffel bags to all children so that they don't have to put all their belongings. And it's a whole social movement. And in addition to that, 4 states in the United States have now passed a law that you can't send kids to or from foster care with a plastic trash bag. I mean, I think that's really, you talk about the things that people can do. So, sort of building on what people said today, and in conclusion, it is not about managing homelessness, but preventing and catching people before they fall. And that it's not a cost, but an investment. Economies are supposed to serve the people. Dignity is not an abstraction, it's a human right. And as a call to action, we can choose differently with the political will to do it. I'd just like to invite any person to join the working group to end homelessness. which meets virtually every month and participated with us in working to end homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you so much for your insights. You were very, very well on target of what was discussed today. I'm sure all of us here appreciate this wonderful wrap-up of our panel discussion. So at this point, I would like to open the floor for questions and give the audience the opportunity to share their thoughts and ask or comment whatever they would like to. If I think I have two hands raised, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll give the floor to Cecily and then Dan. Cecily, she's the chair of the NGO committee on migration. So please, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Despina, and very sincere appreciation to all of the panelists for your thoughtful interventions and for centering the dignity of people and working to make social protection policies more inclusive. I am the chair of the Committee on Migration, but I represent Mercy International Association at the UN. Mercy International Association works to end homelessness, both through direct support services for individuals and families, and through advocacy that addresses the structural causes of homelessness. And I just wanted to say that I really appreciated Ambassador Cronin's remarks on having a holistic, rights-based, and community-oriented approach, and Ireland's investment in addressing the root causes of homelessness, and Ms. Jimenez's remarks about homelessness and that is never caused by a single event, and how emergency responses are not sufficient. Jean, you represented this as an iceberg where we see and address only a small piece of a larger structural issue. Sylvia, you emphasized the essential need for universal social protection floors. And of course, Marianne, you embody the importance of listening to those most affected by policy decisions. So I'd be interested in hearing from all of the panelists in your different capacities, how governments, the UN system, and civil society can further strengthen partnerships to make sure that social protection systems move beyond those short-term responses and more effectively address structural drivers of homelessness, including lack of affordable housing, of course, but also gender inequality and income insecurity. Of course, homelessness has so many different manifestations and different and interrelated causes and impacts. And since we represent entities with different capacities and responsibilities, could you maybe share an example of how you actively work to break down the silos to address the holistic and long-term needs of people in situations of vulnerability? Thanks.
Thanks, Cecily. Dan, if you want to share your question as well, in case all of the speakers or one of them would like to combine their responses. Please introduce yourself, Dan. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you to everyone. That was a really, really fantastic discussion. So I'm Dan Jones. I'm Global Advocacy Lead for DePaul International, based in the UK. And my question was going to be for Ambassador Cronin, actually, thinking of the island context and Ireland's leadership role. As you'll know, there's lots of momentum on tackling homelessness at the European Union level at the moment, with the launch of the Affordable Housing Plan in December, the upcoming anti-poverty strategy, the European Commission Housing Summit later this year. Lots of really exciting momentum, which I think is good, reflects the growing crisis on homelessness that there is in almost every member state of the EU. So my question was going to be kind of how Ireland can build on that momentum when they have the EU presidency in the second half of this year, and also where your reflection of just whether you see a role for the EU to play a global leadership role at the UN and other spaces, given all of this momentum at the European Union level. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. So is anyone from the panelists would like to take Cecily's question, or if Ambassador, if you would like to also address Dan's, please feel free to do so, or we can give you some time if you would like. Sylvia, yes, please.
Well, I hope I'd really like to hear the answer from the ambassador as well. That's a great question, Dan. But in general, the answer, I think, perhaps to Cecily, I mean, we feel in the coalition that it's very important that national implementation plans are put together by 2028 on the commitments in Doha for social protection and, of course, for homelessness, which requires us to work together in partnership, as has been described. And we should have time-bound targets. We should be able, as civil society, to partner together to come up with our plans at the national level, relate it to the voluntary national reviews if we can, and be very clear about what governments have committed to do. And that is how we hold this expression, hold feet to the fire. But we have to partner up, and we have to have the people, in this case, the homeless, within that partnership. And it's the case for when we're rolling back ageism, discrimination based on gender, as is going to be discussed in the CSW and so on. We have to be aware of what governments have promised, and we have to partner up to monitor. So all the work that Maren and her team are doing on data and the Commission for Statistics, all the work that the UN is doing is so important. And I suppose finally to say, we have to support the United Nations. It's in a big mess. And people don't believe it because they actually have lost faith in governments and so on. So let's get behind the UN. There's wonderful work that was done in Doha and before, and keep going. And thank you very much, Despina, for putting this great panel together. We thank you from the coalition. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you so much. I'll give the floor to His Excellency, Ambassador Cronin.
Well, thank you very much for that. And thanks, Cecilia and Dan, for the questions. Cecilia, you spoke about how to strengthen partnerships and address structural change. I will talk about the UN level at the moment. There's a huge amount of effort going into reforming how the UN operates under the Secretary General's UN80 initiative. And, it's fair to say that the UN is at a time of crisis. We've a liquidity crisis, we've a financial crisis, and some would argue a legitimacy crisis. And really what we're working hard on is shoring up the UN, ensuring that it's fit for purpose, and enabling the UN to continue to fulfill its role, including at the country level where it matters the most. And some of that is shoring up and protecting the normative mandates that we've agreed for the UN, be it in the space of human rights, or gender equality, or even the ability of UN organizations to provide training and capacity building and technical advice, to remove the kind of fragmentation that we've seen of UN agencies who are competing for ever reducing funds, having a multiplicity of organizations at the country level of UN entities, and having a clearer structure. And so using the current financial and liquidity crisis in a way to have a far more coherent and impactful UN. And one of the key parts for Ireland in that is in these issues around social protection and social justice and delivering the last mile for those who are the most hardest to reach, the most vulnerable, to us becomes the touchstone. That's what we're trying to bring in with many others from across regions into the discussions, so that if we are, and whilst we are reforming the UN, that we're able to ensure that we're not depleting its mandate or its ability to actually, address those structural issues, and also to maintain the partnership approach. And that's something that, again, Ireland is stressing again and again. Where is civil society? Where are the stakeholders? How can we bring them in? What role do they have to play? How do we ensure that we keep engagement and participation and involvement to the fore? So, we took part in the revitalization of the Commission on Status of Women. Using that barometer, we have a new role now. We will be reviewing the Human Rights Council and its role within the UN. Between now and July, the President of the General Assembly has just appointed our permanent representative here and the permanent representative of Senegal to play that role. And so there are opportunities that we'll be leaning into on that. And then finally, Dan, thank you for that question. I won't pretend to be familiar with the vast amount of work that is taking place at the European Union level from the domestic point of view. But absolutely, our presidency of the EU from July to the end of this year will be a pivotal moment for us. Using the UN lens and where we stand here in New York, we will be very much trying to use our presidency to also influence the budgeting and the approach of the European Union vis-a-vis its global commitments over the next 7 years. Because, we're negotiating the multi-annual financial framework, which is basically the budget of the EU, including for its global engagement over the next 7 years. That's going to be something which, again, one of our priorities here will be to ensure that the social sectors, health, education, human rights, social protection are adequately provided for, and funding for which is protected within the European mechanisms. And that, again, that we try and ensure that we're using the measuring stick of the SDGs and factoring in those who are furthest behind in terms of those very important decisions that we collectively as EU member states will be making in the second half of this year. And certainly even today's discussion is very important in feeding back into the mission here, which I will be doing, and Quiva and others likewise, of the very issues we're speaking about and how we keep those to the front of the agenda as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you for capturing so well what is happening, what the reality is at the UN level, and the discussions that are taking place, the structural approaches that are needed. I really appreciate your comments. Jean, I thought you had your hand raised, or?
Yes, I did, but I was aware of the time as well. Very quickly, just to respond to Cecily in terms of the structural changes. I suppose one of the key things for us as a working group to end homelessness is to have a definition on homelessness. What are we talking about? We have to see it, to act on it, but we need to know what it is, and we also need data to accompany that. I think somebody else said this before, but I know this from my working life, and had actually, Dónal worked very hard in Ireland on this when I was working as a practitioner, to integrate services into the work we do, because it can be very siloed. It can be one part of the government doing housing, doing health, social protection, and the only way we can do it is that we do it together. So that's my last bit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. I'm very well aware that we are over our time. Thank you, Dan, for sharing your report in the chat box. We look forward to reading that, and for Anna and Sylvia for sharing your website for people who are interested in learning more on social protection floors. Before we conclude, I would like to ask our wonderful speakers if they can share just one key message, no more than a minute of your time, a final thought, like what comes to your mind when somebody asks, what does it take to turn from commitments into action, from words into actual tangible results in order to end homelessness. Your Excellency, would you like to go first, or I can go backwards?
No, I can. Yeah, no, that's. I'll even take less than 1 minute because it's very clear for me from listening to the wonderful presentations that were made and hearing the great work that is going on by Marianne, by Jean, Sylvia, others, Jacqueline, the work that Dessa is doing. You know, the common thread for me, economies are supposed to serve people, not the other way around. That's an essential. It's one that our former president, Michael D. Higgins, spoke eloquently and often about. Economies serving people, people at the center, people first, dignity at the core. And the last word I would say is from what we're describing and the commitments that we as governments have made, it's about accountability. It's about following through on policy and commitments. It's about learning and being humble enough as well to know that where things are not working, to change course, to find ways of doing things, and to forever, as Jean eloquently put it, ensure that people are with us, are engaging. Nothing without people, about them without them at the core as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Maren?
Thank you so much, Despina, and thank you so much to the other panelists and participants online as well. I mean, just really quickly, I know my message has been around data, but just to hammer home that, again, you know, we really have data that captures moments and not people's lives. And so that's what we really need to make more effort towards, is actually capturing the richness of people's experiences and their, you know, not only at one moment of time, but across the life course as well. And that's something that we really hope to continue to showcase within the World Social Report. We're already thinking about what the 2027 report will look like, and with our eyes towards the next SDG summit that will take place in 2027, and where we'll start talking about what a contours of a possible post-2013 development agenda would look like. And then, you know, how do we take our existing commitments on homelessness further and reflect them into the global development agenda? And thank you again.
Thank you so much, Maren. Jean?
Well, at this stage of my life, I'm going to be saying the same thing: to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. That's my big dream, really. To treat homelessness as a solvable problem. I passionately believe that. Invest in people, not in programs, because we can talk about the things we can do, but actually what we're about is investing in people and people who experience homelessness.
Thank you so much, Jean. Sylvia?
Hi, I sort of said it before, but I'm going to incorporate some really important words. I think if we could work together to have people-centered, people first across the life course, national implementation plans in place by, I think, maybe 2027, 28, to achieve the commitments laid out in Doha on social protection in particular and homelessness, with time-bound targets up to 2030 and 2031, where we will review Doha together. And if we can, I think it's really interesting, Maren, you talk about capturing lived experience rather than moments. If we can all contribute to that effort so that we have community data, not just statistics, and if the community data is collected by people themselves who are who have confidence that there will be people-centered policies which are not just about economic growth, but about people's dignity, that would be fantastic. So if we could, that's a call to action of everybody in this group, that we try and do that together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Marianne?
Yes, always foremost, participation and inclusion. I probably sound like a broken record to people who have heard me speak before, but always policy based on partial knowledge will never be fully effective. It is the people with the direct experience that knows how policy works in actuality, opposed to the way it's supposed to work on paper. People with the direct experience should always be included. Every panel, every webinar, every conversation around policy and best practices. I know it's harder. It's getting harder and harder to have people come to the UN because of visa issues, but there are ways to make sure that people with direct experience of housing, homelessness, poverty are always included in the conversation and at the forefront of the conversation, because they have the experiential knowledge that knows what works and what doesn't work. So always participation.
Thank you so much, Marianne. So, Jackie, I have a question for you at the chat box from Maria Fornella. So if you would like to give us your key message based on that question, where should the working group to end homelessness focus on as next steps? Just very, very briefly. If you can unmute yourself.
Well, I think the working group to end homelessness needs to create partnerships across all these many areas: poverty eradication, human rights. We need to we need to get more people to buy into the fact that homelessness is not an individual failure. It's a failure of the systems of government, and that we need to be more specific about promoting the inclusion of people with lived experience in helping formulate our advocacy programs to member states when we go and speak to them about ending homelessness.
Okay, thank you so much, Jackie. I would take that as your key message. I know we're over our time, so I would like to close this meeting on behalf of the International Presentation Association, the Permanent Mission of Ireland to the UN, the NGO Working Group to End Homelessness, and our co-sponsors, ECPAT USA, International Association of Charities, Sir Optimist International, and APNI-AP, Women Worldwide. We wish to thank all of you for being here. A big thanks to our wonderful, wonderful speakers for this informative and rich discussion. We are extremely grateful to have you with us. It has been a pleasure personally and as a group to have these speakers. A big thanks, of course, to all of our attendees. Thank you for your time. Have a good morning, evening, night, depending on where you're connecting from. Thanks again so much, and I look forward to future projects. Thank you.
And thank you to the organizers.
Thank you,
for bringing us all together.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. All the best.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much. Thank you.